This is our event today. We will be talking about responsive regulation. First of all, thanks each one of you for sharing your time with us today. My name is Mario, and I hope you are well. Here at ANAC, we are always trying to improve the way we do things, but there's a perception that we can improve the range of tools available to make the regulated entities comply with our rules. The main tools currently in use are correction plans, suspensions, penalties, fines, and looking for effectiveness improvements. ANAC recently started a project that aims to expand this toolkit and include other tools such as positive incentives, consultancies, training, and so on. The scope of the project is not only compliance, but also what actions ANAC can take from a more agile, proportionate, and collaborative regulatory point of view. And as part of that context, this event aims at making ANAC's employees and the industry aware of experiences and best practices of other authorities and the industry regarding compliance with rules, collaborative approaches, and performance-based initiatives. It's my pleasure to moderate this panel, a virtual roundtable with experts from IATA to promote a debate on responsive regulation and safety. This event is being streamed live through YouTube ANAC's channel, and it will take approximately 1.5 hours. And also expecting the participation of our audience, we set up a Slido room that can be accessed through the QR code that you can see on the screen. You also have other channel that you can change the audio. There is a translation also available. You can also see those details in the video description on YouTube. I would like to say that this event will be organized the following way. I will first of all invite our director Thiago to say some welcome remarks. Then I will present our experts. They will provide us with some considerations on topics that they prepare to share with us. Then we will start rounds of questions that we will be covering topics of interest and also topics that our audience posted on Slido, and then some final remarks. So, Thiago, I would like to invite you to provide your warm-up and welcome remarks to the event. Please, Thiago.
Thank you, Mario. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure for me to participate in this opening session of a so important event for ANAC. As Mario said, we have been discussing and gradually implementing some of the best practices of regulation, such as responsive regulation and smart regulation. It's a challenge. For us, on one hand, our very regulated sector and sometimes prescriptive regulation environment in civil aviation sector is a challenge to us in order to modify our mindset of seeing the issues and deal with the regulated firms. On the other hand, we have some culture issues in aviation, and these issues help us to adopt those good practices, new practice for us, but good practice in regulations. In this sense, I would like to thank IATA in the person of the speakers, Beat and Gabriel, for the partnership in organizing the event and reinforce that good regulation depends on the constant dialogue between the regulated sector and the regulatory body. I also like to say thank you to Mario, our brilliant civil servant, always requested by the high direction of ANAC to lead very strategic projects for the agent's improvement. So, guys, for ANAC as an authority in the sector, having a more cooperative and proactive approach towards our regulated entities to build a relationship based on trust and responsibility is a fundamental point. In this sense, we hope to advance increasingly and whenever possible towards performance-based rules, while seeking to guide our supervisory inspection actions in a data and risk-based approach. And I think we are in a good way. And events like this one, are very important to us to discuss, to learn, and to listen different points of view and possible different approaches in order to become this new kind of regulation, smart regulation practice, responsive regulation practice, become then internalizing in our culture and in our procedures. Finally, to end my initial words, I would like to wish you an excellent event and a very productive morning of discussions. Thank you, Mario. Have a good event, everyone.
Thanks, Thiago, for your welcome remarks. We know your agenda is very busy, so please feel free to leave the room if you needed to, and if you can, it will be welcome to stay with us too. Now, let's introduce our two knowledgeable professionals that are here with us today. Both work for an IATA. First of all, we will have with us Gabriel Acosta Cardenas. He is responsible for IATA safety programs. He is head of safety at IATA. He's been identifying safety risks and promoting risk mitigations to the industry, working together with IATA members, manufacturers, regulators, professional organizations, and the International Civil Aviation Organization. A key part of his role is managing the IATA Accident Classification Task Force, a unique group of industry stakeholders that analyzes, classifies, and provides safety recommendations to prevent accidents. This work is also the foundation of the IATA flagship document, the IATA Annual Safety Report, in production for 59 years. Gabriel, thanks being here with us and sharing your time and your knowledge. And also we will have Beth Yund, Senior Manager Audit Standards at IATA. He's based in Montreal and has been dedicating the last 4 years to the IATA Operational Safety Audit, IOSA program. With a degree in aeronautical science, he has worked for over 25 years in the aviation industry, dedicated to flight operations, ground operations, quality, and safety. For more than 11 years, he acted as an auditor and also instructor for the IOSA program. Beat, also thanks to share your time and to be here with us today. I will now give the floor to Gabriel that will provide us some interesting insights and information regarding data and how it is used in safety. Gabriel, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Mario, and thank you to Director Tiago and everyone that organized this. And I'm very happy to be here with you. It's an interesting conversation. I have prepared a presentation that I hope where I'm going to try to tell you a little bit of a story that I hope will give you encouragement on this new goal that you have set up for yourself in Brazil to modernize and keep going forward with how do you make aviation as safe as we can. And I give you hopefully some ideas, but also give you some challenges of where you can go, what do we see it's going on out there in the industry and where you could take things. So let me start a little bit very quickly. I like to always do this. I don't like to assume people know who we are. So IATA is an organization that represents the airlines. We're founded in 1945, right before ICAO. ICAO was founded after IATA. And like I said, we are a global organization. We have, it varies, but around 293 passenger and cargo carriers are part of IATA that represent over 83% of the global air traffic. And a lot of the work we do on the operational side has to do with creating standards to improve our safety, our operation, and try to help the airlines, the airports, and everyone in the industry to work as a global international industry as we are. And we have there what we like to say that IATA's role is to represent, lead, and serve the airline industry. So here I'm going to start my little story. So if you see this graph I pulled from our annual safety report back in 2007, 15 years ago, and you see our region, the Latin American and Caribbean region, the accident rate was 9.7, was almost twice as much as the world average. And it was really not in pair with other regions that we saw were having tremendous results. We saw that year North America, North Asia, Asia, and Europe with 0 hull losses. So the question started with why are we having 9.7 accidents per million sectors when others have really moved forward and achieved some great results? So of course we didn't want to reinvent anything. So we looked over and to see what these regions were doing. And we found a good example in the US where by the leadership of President Bill Clinton back then in the middle 90s, they decided to establish what they call the Commercial Aviation Safety Team. Now, what is the story behind it? If you see this graph I borrowed from one of their presentations, in the mid-90s they saw that their accident rate, in this case their fatality risk, was not going down. The chances of a passenger getting on a plane and having someone die were not going down. So they established this team where they said, okay, let's establish some basic ideas to see how we can go down, but starting with a common objective. And the common objective that brought everyone to the table, of course, was the safety of the passengers and the crews on board. And they said, let's try to reduce our fatality risk by 50% in 10 years. So from 1997 to 2007, they said, let's reduce it in 50%. Well, they did their work, they established this group, and they reduced it in 82%. I'm going to jump ahead in time. Then in 2007, again, they said, by 2020, let's cut this again in half. Well, again, they achieved like a 90-something% fatality risk reduction. So we said, okay, let's learn from them. What have they done? And we borrowed some of those good ideas and we brought them to, in our case, the Latin American and Caribbean regions. So they started with saying we need to do benchmarking. We need to know what's going out there. We need to measure. And we need to recognize that not all the data, back then we were only focusing on accident data. So what about sharing pilot reports? How about sharing FOCA information? And there were a lot of challenges because the culture was not ready for that. People, organizations didn't trust sharing some of that information, talking about the late 90s. So that had to be fixed. Then collaboration. Once we have the data, once we had analyzed it, how are we going to work together on finding where are the opportunities, developing, implement those safety enhancements, and then implementing them. So the idea was, okay, we're going to create an environment where airlines and all the organizations, airports, ground handlers can share information with us without feeling that they're going to be penalized for that. Then we're going to sit together in a table, analyze it together, to the regulator with the industry and all the organizations, including pilot unions and so on. And we're going to find where are the opportunities to mitigate the possibility of fatalities on board a plane. And then we're going to develop together what needs to be done. And why always this word together? Because when someone is at the table from the start to the finish, then when it comes time to implement, they cannot say, oh, I didn't know about this, or why are we doing this, right? Because they were along from the beginning of the process to the end. So when it came time to implement, they didn't do it through more regulations or more oversight. It became voluntary because everyone was eager and recognized this was the right step. So part 3, safety data protection and effective safety altruism became an outcome, became something they could do. They could protect information, create the right environment, know what was going on, and then this important word, safety altruism, working together, bringing resources. Not everyone has limited resources, limited time, limited people, but if we all work together, we can do it. So we saw this good example the FAA had implemented, and in the LATAM CAR region, we created the Regional Aviation Safety Group Pan-American, which goes from Canada to Chile. We brought together through ICAO all the states, of course, but then also all the organizations from manufacturers, from IFALPA, from COSESNA representing the airspace, and IATA, for example, in our case. And we did the same work. We brought together the information, the data, we turned it into intelligence. We started developing things, implementing them, and what were the results? Our objective, again, same as they did in the US. We said, let's reduce the fatality risk by 50% from 2010 to 2020. And this was the result. We started 2010 in 1.15. Our objective was to get it to 0.5. Well, we got it to 0.17. So we did really good working together as industry and governments, ICAO and other organizations. And you can see there the 5-year rolling average in blue and the year-by-year fatality risk. Now, we're now in 2022, so I wanted to show you how are we advancing, because in 2019 and 2020, the same as 2017, 15, and 14, we had 0 fatalities in our region. So it's amazing to look back to that 2007 number of 9.7 and say we were having a lot of fatalities, a lot of fatal accidents, to many years in the previous decade with 0 fatal accidents. And we continue in that direction. 2021, the LATAM CAR region had 0 fatal accidents, the same as North America, Europe, North Asia, and the Middle East. And as you can see, other regions are still lagging behind, and there's opportunities for us in IATA. We're working with those regions to try to follow the same model. And this is the fatality risk, but the 9.7 was an accident rate. So just to show you the accident rate, we went from 9.7 in 2007 to 0.53 in 2021. So this is fatal and not fatal accidents, hull losses, severe damage to planes, 0.53. So obviously, looking at accidents, we were able to get these ideas of looking at the performance of our system and looking what we could do together and in a voluntary fashion and do it. But now we still have more to go forward. We have more opportunities if we start going past accidents into incidents and all those precursors of accidents. So what we started developing in 2020 in IATA is what we call the Global Safety Risk Management Framework, where what we said, okay, what is missing here is that there's some airlines out there, regulators, airports, ground handlers, air navigation service providers that need information. So we said, let's provide a place and open to the public where they can see what are the risks, systemic risks we have identified, Let's provide some safety risk assessments as examples so they can see where they might see some risks and opportunities. And then let's provide the material, not only from IATA, from anyone, from the FAA, from EASA, from Eurocontrol, from ICAO, from Flight Safety Foundation. So you can find the risk, you can find a safety risk assessment, and you can find guidance, documents on what you should be doing about it. So going forward for us, just to continue our example, we need to keep those fatal accidents going down and their precursors. So for example, when we look at worldwide controlled flight into terrain, we had great results worldwide last decade and the beginning of all the way up to 2014, reducing this thanks to training technology, the EGPWS. But then we see things have stagnated and we haven't been able to totally reduce those accidents. And even by accident rate, you see the yellow line, the accident rate has been climbing the last 2 years. So obviously we need to keep working on CFIT. We need to make sure the lessons, the training, the recommendations that we did a decade ago are still current, but then we need to look forward. So of course, we're looking at data. We're looking at the FOCWA data. I put a picture there, for example. We can go with our data and see the EGPWS alerts in airports, in locations. But not only that, we can go further into the performance of the pilots. Are they responding to those alerts? Are they responding in how much time? Are they responding correctly? Are those alerts real? Should they be there? Are the databases of the terrain and airport databases, are they correct? Are they up to date? And we can do very targeted work, tactical work, at the country level, at the FIR level, at the airport level. So again, we looked at, with our partners, with the industry, with everyone, we looked at what should be our implementation plan. And with those learnings, but it's going to be now, the challenge is we have more information, we have more data, we have to look at the performance of the pilot, of the plane, of the database, of the system, and be very proactive. We need to go out there and see if the pilot responses in the organization are not going in the right direction. If pilots are taking too long to respond, okay, training, what do we do about it? How we work together? What is missing in the training? For example, and there's always new threats. Now we have GPS jammings, GPS anomalies, especially around conflict zones. Okay, we need to make sure those are reported. We need to make sure we know about them so we can tell all the airlines flying in that direction that they might see this and that they have to be ready. And we need to remember the lessons of the past. We cannot forget why it's important to have the EGPWS software and database up to date, because they have prevented accidents, and we have seen accidents now where people forgot why it was important to keep this up to date, and there was an accident. Okay, and to give you an example away from accidents, right? Because now we got to move into being proactive. COVID brought a lot of change management challenges. Things were changing every day. One of them was suddenly airlines wanted to use passenger planes, the main cabin, the passenger cabin to take cargo, to take COVID samples or vaccines or personal health equipment. So we said, okay, this is nothing that it hasn't been done before. There's no regulations, that the manufacturers didn't have guidance or the regulators knew how to approve it. So let's do a safety risk assessment. What is the event we are worried about? For example, fire on board that could cause a hull loss. So, okay, from the start, no dangerous goods on passengers' cabin. But also, besides that, what were the best practices? There are things like, for example, if you, on the side of the cockpit, if you cover the vents on the side, on the bottom, I don't know if you notice them, if you cover enough of them, you can create a differential pressure between the main cabin and the cargo cabin, which has caused accidents in the past. Planes that have depressurized very rapidly and had a hull loss because too many vents were covered. So things like that we really need to bring all the industry, manufacturers, airlines, pilots, regulators, ICAO, can be done and then voluntarily implemented. So what we saw is a result from going from what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, people just throwing boxes in the plane, to something that made sense, that was organized, that was looking at safety, but also allowing the airlines to operate and to move forward and to do their role. And then we didn't see any accidents out of this. We might have seen some incidents, but no accidents, nothing serious. So we're being effective, we're being proactive. And so on with many things that are coming in aviation, like drone operators or this now urban mobility and lithium batteries, so many things. This is the way forward now. We need to look at the data and we need to be on top of the operation, but then we need to enable it through safety practices and working together. Those are the concepts that I challenge you to look forward. You've had some great examples, great successes in Brazil, for example, with the Brazilian cast, which is doing amazing work, and you could replicate that. And I assure you, the industry, we're eager to work with you, to share information if the environment is right, and to go as far as we can go with you. So that is my presentation. I hope I didn't do it too long, Mario, but thank you. And I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of the same from Beat, because we work very closely together. So I give it back to you, Mario. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel. Thanks for sharing those important topics to hear to our audience. I would like to invite Beat to talk again on safety, but regarding the evolution of the IOSA program. I would not get spoiled anything, so Beat, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. And I hope you can see my screen. Okay, very good. So yes, essentially also adding on to what Gabriel was saying in the interest of improving safety, we're also taking some initiatives on our side from IOSA. One of those initiatives is what we call risk-based IOSA, a project that we're currently working on. Now, before going into that, here just a couple of numbers in case anybody's not too familiar with IOSA. Hopefully that's not the case. In any case, it's an audit program, of course, for airlines. We have roughly 400 airlines on the registry from 130 countries. You can see how many audits we performed last year. It's a bit more than normal due to shifts in COVID. These audits are performed by a bit less than 300 auditors, and you can see the program is largely used within the industry, meaning the reports are being shared amongst the airlines for code share and other monitoring purposes. So you can see about 4,500 reports have been exchanged last year alone. So that's just as a quick intro into IOSA. So what are we doing on the IOSA front in the interest of further improving the safety performance to also drive down that accident rate? I think it's clear over the history that pure compliance alone is not enough to drive down accident rates further. So we have to look at other things, other ways to do that. And in IOSA, what we intend to do is focus more on things which are not purely derived from a compliance-based aspect, but more into a maturity aspect. And in order to do that, of course, we have to free up resources from the auditors, from the current pure compliance or conformity verification, so they have more time to look at more maturity aspects related especially to the SMS. So again, what are we planning to do under risk-based IOSA? We plan to reduce the number of standards and recommendations that we audit during a particular audit. Right now, we're looking at about 930 ISARPs, standards and recommendations that an IOSA audit consists of. So you plan to reduce that number so that the auditors have more time essentially to look at other things which are very important as well from the aspect of safety. So on this slide here, it's a quick comparison between what an IOSA audit is today and what we envision tomorrow. So today, again, we have a very standardized audit checklist. It's identical for every single operator, irrespective of the operator's individual circumstances, irrespective of how many times this operator has gone through an IOSA audit. And we have some that have already gone through 10 audits altogether. It's very much a compliance-driven approach, meaning we have very prescriptive standards in there that are simply verified for that compliance/conformity aspect. Last but not least, also currently, in case anybody has ever seen an IOSA audit report, it's a very long document. It's PDF, a lot of text. So we also, as part of this project, would like to improve that side as well. Now, what are we looking for in the future? Again, the tomorrow, meaning the risk-based IOSA, will see a tailored audit scope focusing on pertinent safety risks, essentially, or priorities within an operator and the industry altogether. We will introduce what we call a maturity assessment, meaning by reducing the number of standards that an auditor will verify during an audit, the auditors will have more time to look into maturity of systems, such as the SMS, for example, but I'll get to that in just a moment. And again, we look at improving also the reporting side of how IOSA reports results, away from a pure PDF with a lot of text into more user-friendly information, graphics, dashboards, etc., in order to make the consumption of that data also better moving forward. Now, how are we planning to do that when we talk about risk-based scoping? So what you see here is essentially two steps in this process. Again, we start out with 930 roughly standards and recommendations, and we are planning to categorize them into high, medium, and low priority. And this is done first for the entire industry, and the second step is done for the operator individually. Now, to do that, we use data. We use things like accidents, and essentially we map our standards to accident classifications. We look at conformity levels within the industry. Also, you've heard from Gabriel, the Global Safety Risk Management Framework. So we use that as an input into this prioritization. And also we use subject matter expertise, meaning a number of SMEs have rated essentially from their individual perspective the ISARPs. And then all of these factors together are weighted, which will ultimately lead to this priority rating. Now, once we have done that for the entire industry, we will do the same for the operator's individual circumstances, meaning just before an audit, then we look at the operator that we're going to audit. We look at whether they've had specific events in the past. We look at the operator's audit history, meaning have they had non-conformities in the past. And also we look at the profile, the operational profile, meaning, for example, have they added new aircraft types? Have they grown considerably within the organization, etc.? And all of these factors ultimately will reprioritize those ISARPs. And then ultimately what we will focus on is the high and medium priority ISARPs. And the low priority, those are the ones that are going to be sampled essentially by the auditors during an IOSA audit. So that's in a nutshell how the risk-based IOSA scoping will work. Now, here are a couple of examples just for illustration purposes, what that would mean specifically. So let's assume in the industry there has been an increased number of runway excursions. So today, if we know that really wouldn't make any difference, meaning all the ISARPs are still audited the same way with the same efforts. Now, in the future, under risk-based IOSA, what we will do is we will essentially map the ISARPs that are there to prevent these things from happening, such as runway excursions, and we will prioritize them to make sure that the auditors will look more in depth at those specific provisions to ensure that the operators are in fact implementing the requirements accordingly and the way they should be. The bottom example is one related to a specific operator. So let's say an operator has over several audits been continuously in conformity with a low priority ISARP. Again, today that really wouldn't make any difference. We would still audit those low priority ISARPs in the same way with the same efforts. Whereas in the future, an ISARP which is classified as low priority, and if the operator has been continuously in conformity with that one, then it would not necessarily be audited anymore, but would simply be subject to sampling during an audit. So not necessarily audited with full efforts altogether. So that's one side of the story of what we're looking at. The other side is, as I mentioned before, with the gained time that we will have by reducing the number of ISARPs, we will introduce what we call the maturity assessment. Now, the maturity assessment is essentially there to look at specific systems within an operator to see not only whether they are conforming to the respective requirements, but rather also how well essentially they are conforming, and are they going beyond what we call pure conformity. So what you can see here is an illustration of the levels that we intend to introduce with the maturity assessment. So on that scale, we have what we call conformity, which is essentially the equivalent of basic conformity, documentation and implementation, just the normal minimum which is required for registration as an IOSA operator. Now, beyond this conformity assessment, we have additional levels that we have introduced, which is established, mature, and leading. And again, the intent of this is to share with the operator essentially where they stand on the scale, so where they have essentially room for improvement, and also potentially in the future within the industry from a sharing point of view, so that operators can see their co-chair partners, how well they're doing, also for the purpose essentially of benchmarking. So also an idea here is moving forward that airlines will have access to this data. They will see, they can benchmark how they're doing within the industry, within their region, for example, or within their segment, to have a better idea, and again to see how they can further improve their systems, which will ultimately help towards making the system and the operator safer. So again, what we're looking at is an assessment beyond pure conformity, because many of the standards that we have, especially in the SMS, they're very generic, meaning you can do very little and be in conformity, and you can do a lot, of course, and still be in conformity. And currently, there's no differentiation that we have within the IOSA system. We also intend to look at potentially giving operators recommendations in the sense of how they can improve their system moving forward. Again, always in the interest of improving safety performance. Now, these recommendations currently within IOSA audits may take place, but they're very informal. Whereas in the future, what we intend to do is to bring that a bit more on a formal level, to also give clear guidelines to our auditors what would be permissible when it comes to recommendations, and where it would go beyond a certain limit, because of course we have to be very careful as well that we don't go into what would be considered consulting, because that's not the intent or not within the scope of what we do during an IOSA audit. On the right-hand side, essentially, you see the areas that we would like to focus on with this maturity assessment. So it's primarily the SMS and related components as viewed from the ICAO SMS framework. But we would also like to look at operationally critical areas such as crew training, flight data analysis, ops control. Those are just some examples that we will envision to include as part of this maturity assessment. So that's in a nutshell the changes that we are introducing with risk-based IOSA. And here, to sum it up, just some basic benefits that we hope from that. So again, we will tailor the audit scope, focusing on areas where it's most needed, essentially within an operator or within the industry altogether. We will improve the audit methods through this maturity evaluation. Also, what we will focus on very much moving forward is the standardization of auditors, because it's very important, especially as we move into the maturity assessment, that the auditors apply this assessment in a consistent manner, so that the results also will be essentially comparable from one audit to the next. Again, improved safety insight, ultimately to reduce the number of accidents within the industry, and of course, improved insights for operators using the data that we provide during an audit or as part of an audit through better reporting. So that's it from the benefits that we hope from that, and that sums up my presentation of IOSA.
Thanks, Beth. Thanks for your presentation. Very interesting and very interesting to see some similarities of approaches that we are also taking here at ANAC. I have some questions to explore around that. But first, I would like to explore, and I think the topic will be for both of you with different perspectives, but I think applies to you both and the topics that you presented to us. Regarding the importance of safety in our aviation market, we see different approaches taking place, and something is in constant evolution. We see different techniques, different technologies coming into place, but one of those things that I think it's important to highlight here, mainly when we kind of stress a little bit the idea of focusing on problems, focusing on critical aspects, and putting in that discussion some principles of responsive regulation, smart regulation. I think there is, for those that are not so well prepared, somehow traps that can be placed in that discussion, just probably inducing those not well prepared people that we can simplify everything because we have low rates of accidents, because we have a safe market. I would like to hear from both of you the importance of those minimum standards that we, as time went by, we saw those step-by-step approaches building this safety that we can see today. But not only we would like to be there, but we would like also to improve, and this is why we are discussing here new approaches and so on. But just to set the stage, those first and main aspects of it is important to have those minimum standards, and with that in place, we can also have other tools. We can develop complementary initiatives in order to improve even more. But just to explore this first step, I would like to hear from both of you how important it is from your point of view, and also inside IOSA, those standards and these minimum standards, how those take, what is the role of those minimum standards for the level of safety that we have now. Gabriel, you can start, and then I would provide the floor to Beth.
Thank you, and I will steal the idea that Beat presented of the maturity model. Good safety cannot be built if you don't have that, if you don't start with solid construction. And compliance, especially like I mentioned, there's things that we've learned in the past, we've implemented, and all those stories and learnings need to be there. Now, there's different ways to monitor compliance that, like we were showing, we're moving forward. You can monitor compliance through performance. You can monitor compliance going forward through many means, not just oversight. So for those that already have compliance, like you say, it's important to keep pushing them to move forward. And I recognize the role of the regulator and the challenges because you have to deals with a big spectrum of service providers, some of them with the latest technology, maybe the last business jet, and a lot of resources, all the way to the other side where you might have training organizations, putting pilots, training pilots, or doing prop testing and things like that. And those planes might not have the latest technologies. So the idea is that by focusing your resources on performance base of the ones that are on top of the compliance in a different way, maybe you free resources to help the ones that need a more hands-on approach. A flight school, the crop duster, a small operator. And then again, you can go to the same model of helping them, like the work we do with BEAT. What is that minimum standard, right? We created the ISA audit together, which in IATA, which is for small operators. We started with IOSA. We said, what are the minimum requirements in Annex 6 that everyone should have to operate a small plane under 6,700 kilos that are there for safety? And then we're doing the same now. This was 7 years ago or so, and now with BEAT we're doing the same. What are the standards that are absolutely essential to prevent accidents that need to always be complied with and that we cannot miss? So that is our idea of the minimum standards, but then how you comply can also be taken to the future on how do you monitor the compliance. That we don't need to think of just compliance equals direct oversight and auditing. Okay, that's what I can give. I'll leave it to Beat.
Yes, from an IOSA point of view, essentially how we envision to ensure that all of the requirements are still fulfilled is through procedural means. Now, with IOSA, of course, with the risk-based IOSA, we are reducing the number of ISARPs that we audit during any given audit. Of course, we no longer verify all of them, but we cut back essentially, and we focus more in depth on the ones that remain. Now, clearly, and that's the appeal and the information that we have provided to the industry as well, with the start of this project and these measures, that the expectation is still that the operators, of course, are in conformity with all of the requirements or all of the standards that we have within IOSA. Simply within the IOSA audits, we may not verify every single one, but the requirement continues to be for an operator to be on the registry is they have to internally do their auditing against all of these ISARPs. So it's been a requirement for the last few years and continues to be under risk-based IOSA, and becomes even more important that this particular aspect of the monitoring is adhered to. Also, to reduce the risk that operators essentially will focus on what we define as medium and high priority ISAPs and kind of leave the low priority on the side, is the low priority will continue to be subject to sampling, meaning an IOSA auditor during a particular audit will pick a few out of the low priority category and audit them, and the operators will not know which ones the auditors will choose. So it's essentially the procedural means that I mentioned that will ensure that the operators will still continue to conform to all of them. It's the measure and the method in which we ensure that, which changes, but continuous conformity, of course, is an important aspect. Last but not least, if you recall from the inputs into the prioritization, one of them is conformity rate. Now, if a number of ISARPs over, let's say, several years are not being assessed anymore, then that conformity data disappears, which automatically recycles those standards into at least a medium priority, so to make sure they come back into the audit scope. In other words, if no longer conformity data is available, automatically they will be upgraded into a medium priority, so that over several audits they will come up and they will be verified. So that's essentially the way that we envision to ensure that with an IOSA.
I'll add a very last idea very quick. Notice, Mario, that neither Beat or me have mentioned lowering standards or eliminating essential standards, because I think there's that difference. The standards exist for a reason, and that's another discussion about some that maybe may not be needed anymore, but we're never talking about reducing the standard or the performance that the airlines should comply with.
Yeah, it's very good to listen from you both. I think it's important to highlight that sometimes we really need to remove some of those, but the necessary ones, they will be there because they were built because of something that we're realizing in the past as important, and this is why they are there. and if they are still important, they will be kept there. And I think the SMS was a good enabler to allow not only states but also and mainly the service providers to focus on the aspects that were more important to their operations. So it's a way to, I would say, to regulate, but in a smart way, because it will fit the specific problems for specific operations for specific operators. So it's a generic set of tools that will be customized according to specific necessities. I think it was very brilliant, and for at least for me, it's an essential enabler to this kind of change that we are discussing. And Beat, just to explore a little bit, you mentioned something that I think it's very interesting for us here. The IOSA program will have some frequency that the air operators will be assessed, but there's also something that you haven't mentioned, but I think it's important too, is they must self-audit and share that result with the IOSA program. And my question would be, how that information self-generated by air operators fit in this model that you were setting up?
So the self-auditing results, as of right now, are being shared during an audit. In other words, the IOSA auditors will verify that during the audit to make sure that the operator has essentially done this internal auditing. Now, we introduced a while back what we called enhanced IOSA, where that concept was introduced, essentially, this internal auditing. We had what we call the conformance report, which actually had to be shared with the operator prior to an audit, where all of these assessments were shared with the audit organization and were reviewed as part of the preparation. Now, moving forward with risk-based IOSA, how we will essentially use that data or the information coming from the operator's internal oversight, that's to be defined. Right now, it's subject to review on site, but of course, in the efforts of having data to support the risk-based IOSA and the prioritization, maybe this is something that will be introduced in the future, that we have some sort of data coming out of the operator's quality assurance program that will feed into this overall prioritization. Again, of course, that will have to or would have to go through our governance that we have within the IOSA program. Whether this will be part of a future risk-based enhancement, that's to be defined. But of course, we are exploring different ways that will make sense.
Okay, thanks, Pat. And regarding the importance of data and the importance of being well informed for better decision-making processes, I would like to hear from you, Gabriel. You already highlighted some important initiatives, some mainly these collaborative approaches regarding risk mitigation and the sharing of information and so on. I would like to hear from you, what do you see that we still need to improve nowadays, but mainly what do you see in the next future steps that we can evolve in that kind of data gathering, data exploration? Today, it's really important to highlight the importance of flight data programs. The FTX is one of those, but we also have in Europe, in the US, some programs that also are setting up the environment in order to impel people and companies to share their data, to see the system as a whole, and probably to enable authorities and also other stakeholders to make better decisions. What you are seeing now, and mainly the future of those strategies, what you can share here with us regarding those topics and aspects?
Thank you, Mario. That's a very interesting topic. Like I said, in the past, we were focused on accident data. Then slowly we moved into reports from everyone in the operation, from pilots, maintenance, etc. And then at the beginning of the last decade, we started moving into FOQA data extensively, and we had some great results out of using that FOQA data, sharing it, like bringing it together, de-identifying it, and then sharing not the data, but the intelligence back with the system, back with the regulator, the airline, and everyone for benchmarking purposes. We have our program, like you mentioned, FDX, which is a worldwide program, but there's some regions that in the world, like the US and EASA and some others, that have the resources to do it themselves. For those that don't, that's why we created FDX, so that we can enable that. But of course, like anything, we see challenges that we've been addressing little by little. One of them being that some smaller planes, smaller operators, their planes didn't have that capability. And with ICAO, we've lowered now the standards, so that smaller planes are now gonna have that. We're gonna need to have that capability. But also the technology has advanced tremendously. In the late 90s, it was very expensive to have these on a small plane, on a big plane even. To now, there's solutions as little as apps that someone in a general aviation plane can put in their phone and track their flight and share it now with a data sharing program. And Cyrus and many manufacturers of small planes have really moved forward in that, enabling that, making that a lot simpler. But on the other hand, we see the future, which is, and we're taking lessons from the pandemic, where we saw that this data sharing we had going on was too slow. We will gather information and process it and see results sometimes 2-3 months down the road, when things were changing constantly. So in the future, we see the role of data, like for example, from ADS-B data, especially with the space-based ADS-B data, where we might not have the granularity that FOQA data gives you or the insight that a pilot report gives you, but we know what's going on. We know the performance, the unstable approaches, the go-arounds, and things like that on a general fashion on a day-to-day, because an air navigation service provider, if you give him data from a month old, it's useless to them. The data has to be 24, 48 hours maximum, or on time if you can, right? When an airport is managing their runways, it's managing its resources, it needs real-time data. So a lot of the data we see coming in the future is public access data, like ADS-B, is data from people that are monitoring airports, from cameras to see the traffic on the taxiways, from the airspace, that we need to integrate and start using in a tactical way. We've been doing a lot of strategic work on safety, but we need to get it down to the tactical people on the ground that make the decisions hour by hour sometimes to keep a safe operation. So we see that public access data playing a big role, and there's a lot of issues around it, about this being public, about everyone. Incidents going to the internet right away. We know that, and even the frequencies from the controllers have public access, and people get the frequency. They get the ADS-B data from flight radar, they put it all together, and you see information that the public didn't have access to before. So we also need to be on top of that. It's a very interesting development we see in the future.
And it's interesting because the level that we reached and the complexity that we are nowadays, it's almost impossible to see some kind of solution being driven by only one stakeholder to see all those aspects and so on. So it's almost a necessity that we need to have different minds and different stakeholders on board. And besides that, we are also seeing from what you mentioned, I would say the big data wave is there too. And how well prepared do you see the players are in this scenario? Because it will require resources, and I don't know if everybody will be able to be on that scenario, needing to invest in this kind of infrastructure, this kind of competencies, and so on. And if I would like to put another thing in that subject, what is the role of the regions, the collaborative groups that were established in the regions around the world on that? Do you think they play an important role in that scenario?
Definitely, like you said, not everyone will have the resources, and that gets us back to safety altruism. There will be some that will, and we have to stay with this concept of working together in safety in a collaborative way. Because some big organizations are going to have the data, are going to have the means, and of course, they're going to use them for operational and commercial products. But when it comes to safety, we all benefit when we all have access to the knowledge of the safety issues. So we need to keep that in mind. Another issue I see that is very important is trying to react fast to this information. We've learned in aviation that we need to investigate things thoroughly, that when we try to jump to conclusions, we usually get it wrong. But this fast pace of information is going to push us to do that, and we need to keep our ground, if you can, and inform our leaders, train our leaders and the public as much as we can, that in aviation we can jump to conclusions, and also that we're not here to assign blame, but to prevent the next event. So those are big challenges, because the public and other industries and governments out there don't work that way with their industries outside aviation. So that puts a lot of pressure in the system. And about the regional organizations, definitely we need to keep this model that has been very successful of not only a top-down approach, but a bottom-up approach. The regional groups like RASPA have benefited tremendously from the tactical and groundwork that is done at the countries, the risks that are identified in a country, and then going upstream to the regional groups. Maybe they have more resources, we were talking. Maybe they have more data. Maybe they can develop the training or the guidance material that is needed, and help then down again in the bottom, that airport, that operator, that regulator. So it has to work that way. It can be from the top, I have the data, I tell you what to do, because we will miss what is going on in the ground, what that controller is seeing. It's only the people in the ground that can tell us what's going on.
Do you think that vision that realizes the importance of operational people that are really seeing what is happening and sharing what they are seeing to those that will be able to make decisions, more tactical decisions, more strategic decisions, is nowadays well spread and understood? Or do you think there are still some either states or service providers that didn't realize that yet, that they think they can see everything, they can make decisions from their desks, and not incentivizing people to share what they are seeing in real life in operational activities?
Yes, that's a big trap of the big data, thinking that because you have the FOCWA data, the planes, the radars, you understand what's going on in the ground. and minimizing the role of the reports, of the written reports, of the investigation, of the people, creating the right culture where people don't feel like it's going to be punitive for them to come forward and say what's going on. It like again we said, these are the lessons of the past. We know the value of them. We don't have to throw them out because now we have more information or new sources. We have to complement them. The way we work is we use the big data to tell us what's going on in the system, but we use those pilot reports and the interviews and the accidents investigations to really understand what happened and how to solve it. But if you work the other way around, it will be bad also, because there's so many reports that you might miss the big picture if you go written report by written report. And because of safety culture, sometimes people don't report, so you might miss things. So the good data is good for learning where you are, but to act, you need to go down to the ground level and see what's going on once you identify where the big picture issues are.
Yeah, it's very important to highlight to our audience the importance of those complementary initiatives. We cannot take one of those and think that we are well and it's enough. But regarding this huge change that IOSA is introducing in the program, can you share with us what kind of strategies, and regarding from a change management perspective, what are the strategies, the initiatives that you are envisioning that will be needed to put in place in order to develop new skills? I suppose they will be necessary, so I'm assuming there are strategies around that, but correct me if I'm wrong. But what kind of strategies are you envisioning in order to make people that will in real activities perform these new ideas and structure, how they will be able to perform these new activities, these new roles as intended?
Right. Yeah, it's a big change that we're introducing with this project of risk-based IOSA. In general, of course, we have applied a lot of measures from a traditional change management point of view. For example, amongst many things, we have done a risk assessment on all of the things that we are doing to identify potential areas that need more focus in this transformation, in this project. A few very important things that have crystallized, of course, is communication and stakeholder management, because we are introducing a relatively big change, actually the biggest one, I would say, since the IOSA program started about 20 years ago. So one of the things that was identified, of course, is that we have to make sure that all the stakeholders in the program that use the IOSA program, that they're informed and kept up to date as to what we're doing and why we're doing it. Amongst others, we have many regulators on board, for example, that use IOSA. So we have had very close collaboration with a number of them, and that continues also through our regional offices, that they will reach out to these regulators to keep them up to date as to what we're doing it, why we're doing it, the benefits that we envision with that. Because if we just were to change something and nobody knows what we're changing and why we're changing, that could have detrimental results, of course. And that's one thing that we definitely don't want. We are planning to improve the overall safety performance with this measure. And of course, it needs to be clear to everybody that how we intend to accomplish that and why what we're doing is doing that exact thing. The other thing, of course, that's very important for the performance of the IOSA audits are our frontline auditors, meaning the IOSA auditors. So an important aspect there has started in training them in this future application of this new model. It hasn't happened yet. We are in the process now of contracting and selecting the auditors moving forward. It's one of the changes that happened with this project. For those familiar, we use audit organizations currently to perform IOSA audits. Moving forward, IATA has decided to insource the IOSA audits, meaning we will in the future perform them ourselves. And as part of that, of course, we will also contract and train the auditors ourselves, because up until now, there's always been an intermediary in a sense, meaning we had the audit organization. So whatever training efforts that we have developed over the years, they primarily first went to the audit organizations and then to the auditors. So that's one of the things that we have also realized moving forward, that with this change in methodology, change in approach, it's very important to keep the auditors standardized, to keep them abreast with the new changes that we're introducing in the methodology. So having really this direct access to the auditors is a crucial thing. So those were essentially the main things. There's many more, of course, but those were two of the main things that we have identified and that we're continuously working on.
Thanks, Beth, for your insights. But it's really important to highlight that we already envisioned more preparation of our staff, because as much as, or if we compare with the past, that approach that we were too much prescriptive, and nowadays we talked a lot about performance-based approach, risk-based approach, and this kind of things, it will require some kind of skills and abilities that they do not exist or didn't exist in the past, but nowadays they at least will be needed to be used differently. So I think it will also require some strategies on develop them and continues developing them. We have some questions here. I think we can explore those. I will combine those with one that I would like to ask Beth, how IATA see those collaborative initiatives with authorities, sharing the data of operators, the IOSA data of the operators, and if you can share something around how countries are using that in relation to their own surveillance program. I don't know if you have some information around that, but I think it would be like to hear something from you, if you can share with us. And regarding to that, if you can explore a little bit how these kind of arrangements are set up between the IOSA program or the IATA institution and also the authorities of countries.
Yes. So IOSA has been essentially working together with regulators pretty much since the beginning. That was always a very important aspect of what we're doing. Of course, IOSA is an industry program. Nevertheless, there is no reason why there cannot be a collaboration, of course, between what we do and between what a regulator does as part of the oversight of their operators. So we have a number of MOUs that we have in place. The exact number is around 30, with 30 different authorities already, and that continues to grow, and we're very open to that, meaning that we have collaboration with regulators around the world from all regions, and the regulators essentially are using IOSA to complement their oversight. Now, there is a number of different ways how that can happen, and while we have a fairly good idea of how some regulators are using the program, of course, also from the position of a regulator, of course, we seldom get really official, how shall I say, confirmations or statements as to how a regulator, in fact, is using our program. Nevertheless, we are aware of, for example, FA and IATA, the two big regulators that are using IOSA as part of approving code-shares, for example. So if a US carrier wants to code-share with a foreign airline, if that foreign airline is on the IOSA registry, then that's being recognized by the FAA as being sufficient in order to allow this code-share to happen. That's just one example. Similar approach also with the IATA, where they have in their acceptable means of compliance and guidance material for code-share oversight, essentially, the option to use industry program as part of this oversight. So those are some very typical and very well-known ways how IOSA is being used. And again, some regulators have gone to the extent that they say, well, if a foreign airline wants to fly into our airspace, they have to be on the IOSA registry, for example. So there are a number of countries that make that as a prerequisite. Others, for example, base approvals to fly internationally on an IOSA registry. So meaning if you're not on the IOSA registry, you would not get an approval to fly international commercial operations. So these are just some examples of how IOSA is being used by regulators. Also, more internal, some might use them essentially to look at the results to focus more their own oversight. So if IOSA has verified something already, then maybe a regulator could say, well, then I don't need to focus on that anymore, but I can more focus on things that maybe IOSA does not cover. So that goes into an area where we don't really have official information that this is happening, but some indications that some regulators are in fact using the IOSA results in that direction to say, okay, well, IOSA has verified basic compliance, so we can assume to some extent that the compliance is there, and we will really focus much more on higher risk areas, or even on higher risk operators for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Sorry, Gabriel, please go ahead.
Yeah, just to add something else we see around the world is in some occasions an airline will invite their inspectors as observers during IOSA audits. And we believe that's something very healthy. It demonstrates a very advanced culture, safety culture, when the inspector can go along and just as an observer see what IOSA is being audited and how the airline complies with it. It really helps move forward the conversation. Next time that inspector goes to that airline, probably will feel very comfortable about what he needs to see and how things are being done.
Yeah, it's important just to share with you. I was one of those observers in the past. It's an amazing opportunity, and I think it's good to see that according to what you said, it's not so common around the world to see authorities and operators being able to do this kind of things, and I'm really glad that we here can do that in Brazil, because we were invited to participate in one of those IOSA audits, and I was one of those people that were there. It was good. But again, I think we understand this kind of collaboration. We understand that it's important, and we explored in different ways this kind of initiative. For instance, we are not saying replacing surveillance by IOSA program. We are saying complement our current way of doing things and improve it with more data, with more information. But sometimes society do not realize this kind of difference. I would like to hear from you, Beat. Are you aware of how society sees this kind of approaches where industry, associations, and the authority is collaborating with each other and sharing information and this kind of things. I think the point here that is behind is that scary of capture or this kind of things. But I think just to make clear, we are not saying replacing, we're saying complementing. But I think it's good to hear from you. What do you hear around the world regarding that? Are you seeing society as, or not necessarily as a whole, but depending on the region, I don't know if it differs, but how do you see they reacting to this kind of approach?
Yes, no, that's it's very much on point. And what you said, I think, is extremely important to stress again when it comes to a regulator's use of IOSA. It's there primarily to complement oversight, right? There was never the intention, nor should it be, that a regulator replaces their oversight with an IOSA audit. I think that's not realistic, and for sure not by any means the intention of our efforts to have these collaborations with regulators, but rather to say, look, we're doing something. We're auditing provisions that are primarily derived from IKEA annexes. So here are the results. Use them in any which way that you wish, because ultimately also the airlines may have some benefits based on that. That if a regulator uses or recognizes IOSA as part of their oversight, of course, it's also in a sense to the benefit of the operator. So that's essentially that what we're trying to promote as well. Now, yes, there is different perceptions around the world. Of course, we can't really base that on specific data that we have, but I can tell you from personal experience in my, you mentioned the beginning, in my 11, 12 years in the IOSA world, I did not just audits, but I did a lot of training sessions. I did training for regulators, amongst other things as well. And of course, you can see from different parts of the world. I don't think it's really regional necessarily. It's just different mindsets that there is a certain reservation against or towards industry programs. And I've heard that very clearly during one of the training sessions that, some people said, well, why should we use that? This is an industry program. We're a regulator. These are completely different things. We don't know what you're doing. So, yeah, there was a very strong reservation towards IOSA and what IOSA is doing, because also, and this is definitely not something that we want or that we would hope for, that some operators are giving the IOSA audit more priority than the regulator audits. And this is clearly where I can understand that the regulator gets frustrated, saying that, well, there's some kind of a competition going on, which this is not what our intention is at all. I think it's very important that there's a collaboration that we're doing. Again, we're highlighting certain aspects of an operator, and that information we can share if there is an interest and if the operator of course agrees to that, and it's there to complement. It's by no means ever been an idea to replace something that a regulator does.
So, yeah. I will add that when we look at the general public around the world, of course, and in other industries, let's say there's a train crash, of course, the public it's very keen to jump to want the government, the regulator, to act and sometimes even punish or take action. And I would argue that it always happens once things calm down, and now they're in the phase of analyzing what happened and what was the role of the regulator. Is much worse not to show that you were working together with industry, that you knew what was going on, that you were working together towards safety. And we're lucky in that sense that we can show that, because first of all, the public can see results. Aviation is safe. Sometimes it's hard to show the perception, to change the perception, but the numbers don't lie. And then it's important to then show the public that the regulator and the industry are working together and have a clear understanding of what's going on and what can be done about it, and they've been doing it for a long time. That's a much better scenario than I just had a crash and now I'm going to go punish, and then when we investigate, turns out there was no communication between a regulator and the industry, no knowledge, no processes or things or information was not flowing both directions. That's always the scenario we don't want.
Yeah, it's important to highlight those aspects. Well, we are approaching the end of our event, but before that, I'll just to say a few words here. There's a question regarding the importance of rules and reporting systems and their importance to a positive culture, and what is the IATA perception around that. I think we already covered that when we discussed the importance of having the frontline people's view of what is happening and so on. So before closing here, I would like to, before thank you too, I would like to give the floor for final remarks. That if you want to say something, please feel free, Gabriel, and then Beat.
Thank you, Mario. Just to thank you, your team, and also our IATA team in Brazil for this opportunity. This is things that are really important for us to have this discussion. And please, let's continue this discussion. And I will add that it's very hard to build what we have built together with ANAC in Brazil, with the SEA, with so many, the trust, the collaboration. It needs to keep moving forward, but just to remember that it's very easy to also destroy it. If, like that last question says, if we suddenly revert to holding our information, not sharing it with you, or you to being more punitive, that things can happen. It will be very easy to destroy years of culture and creating the right environment. So we want to always remain everyone to know that the things we do together and are very important, the results are there, and we need to keep moving in that direction of trusting each other, but also not using things in the wrong way, because that information that we share, the collaborative work we do, under the wrong focus, under someone that doesn't understand what's going on, sometimes the media can really damage the relationship. So we're very careful on our side not to point fingers, not to use information we have as also to show things that can be taken out of context, but just to use it in the right setting with the right people, the experts, the ANAC experts that can together with us work on it, enabling it, the solutions, and not to put it in a newspaper and say, hey, look what's going on in this airport or here or there. That's not the point of all of this.
Yeah,
thank you very much,
Gabriel, for your words. I really agree with you. Beat?
Yeah, no, I think Gabriel summarized it very well also from an IOSA side. So thank you very much for having given this opportunity to present what we're working on. And of course, very important, if there are questions further to this, because ANAC is also, amongst others, using IOSA. I don't know exactly to what extent, but certainly, of course, if in those efforts there are questions, and things that we can clarify moving forward, we'll be more than happy to do that, because again, the collaboration is very important for us as well. So thank you.
Well, thanks, Beat. Thanks, Gabriel. Thank you for you that joined us today. Many thanks to Gabriel again, to Beat, and all the IATA team and ANAC team that supported this event and make it possible. Thanks to our ANAC director, Thiago, showing their commitment with us here today. Thanks for all of you that participating, posting questions in our chat. And that's all. Thanks a lot. Stay safe, stay sane. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.